What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here at I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball again, happy to be your host. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the platform in any way that you think you can. And to those who are already supporting as channel members and patrons, please do enjoy this first access to the interview I just conducted with the filmmaker of soundtrack to a coup d'etat, Johan Grimonprez. It was a fascinating discussion, raised some of the critique that came up in our discussions with Renee, Mtume, and Geechee. Please check out that as well at the Black Liberation Media Patreon. And salute to those working behind the scenes to make these kinds of interviews happen. Appreciate the support and involvement on that level as well. And again, I had a good time with the discussion. Hope you enjoy it. Again, thanks to patrons and channel members who are getting to see this first, and those who are seeing this after the fact of its early release. Have a thought about those life choices. Otherwise, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and enjoy. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. First of all, I appreciate you joining me and taking the time. I congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
have personally really enjoyed it and find it incredibly fruitful. What I thought I would do is just, if you would, just start with, if you would explain from your vantage point what it is you wanted to convey in this film.
Well, of course, as a Belgian, right? As a Belgian, it's digging into the dark pages of the history of my country in relation to Congo. And Belgium is a young country still. And so a big part of its history is intertwined with that country. You know, when you walk to Brussels, you know, the layout is from still dating from King Leopold II. All the avenues, the Royal Palace, Palais de Justice, is all built with rubber money. And so this is wiped under the carpet. It's sort of something that is actually not fully acknowledged. And even when it comes to, of course, the first democratically elected premier of the Congo, dear Congo, Patrice Lumumba, my country was complicit in the assassination in cahoots with the CIA. So that was a story for me that I did not learn at school. The film itself was a learning curve itself for me as well. But it's something that, you know, when talks about trauma, I think guilt is a bad advisor. But when it comes to trauma, I think those things are shared by as much the perpetrator as the perpetrated upon. And so it was after the film Shadow World, which is the previous film, was digging into the corruption, the global arms trade, which is a pleonasm anyway. But the whole sort of corporate hold on government institutions and sort of it's what Chris Hedges, the former New York Times war correspondent, would say. The corporatocracy is that, for example, what was analyzed in that film, that war is basically privatized, and it's a corporate hold on the foreign policy, where lobbyists and the revolving door are deciding what's actually happening on a global scale. You have 3 defense lobbyists for every politician in Washington. You know, it's Avenue K that is running the government, and Trump and or you name it. You know, it's just a symptom of a larger structural problem. And when, like, digging back into the past of the history of my own country, I thought it was very much the same template. It was the mining industry and the corporate hold, you know, and it's not just the mining industry, the Belgian Union Minière, which was a company that was started by Leopold II. It's also Foster Dulles, the then U.S. Secretary of State, Alan Dulles, you know, the deputy defense minister or secretary, Dillon. They all had stakes in Amex, which also was a subsidiary of Union Minière, which was the biggest income in the Congo, and that was 70% of the income. You know, when they actually succeeded, Patrice Lumumba didn't have any means to sort of run the government, and so that was sort of something that has a similar template that I wanted to dissect in relation to our country. And my country was very much responsible of smashing that sense of hope in the beginning of the 60s, that wave of independence, that the Global South and the non-alignment movement sort of created an alternative sort of view of how the world was divided in East and West. Maybe a little bit of a long intro for
Well, you know, I've heard you mention in a couple of other interviews that were done a couple of them that I was looking at in preparation for today were given a few months ago, and you had mentioned something to the effect of there being some interest, if not concern, about how your country would react to the film. So I did want to ask you about if there's any updates you could give us, like how has your country, to the extent there's been a sort of a monolithic response, responded to the film, and how does that compare to the adulation you're also getting from other sectors of the film industry and
Mhm.
community?
Well, there's been some severe attacks by the right wing sort of parties, even in the press. Uh, but it's very often a very weak response in this, in the way of like calling my film propaganda. And then I would say, if condemnation without research is the summum of stupidity, said Einstein once. And I feel, the page numbers are mentioned even in the research of this film, because I knew I would get backlash and that I would get grilled. So I made sure that the journalistic sources were really mentioned. The cables that actually alluding to the complicity are really mentioned. So there's a split in Belgium. There's an influx of an Afro-P community in Brussels that is really sort of holding sort of institutions accountable. And we have to talk also about the extraction economy that is still up to today. We're talking about East Congo because M23 has overrun East Congo. Not only Goma, reconquered Goma, but also Bukavu, where Dennis Mukwege runs the Panzi Hospital. And day-to-day basis, because we were in contact, day-to-day basis, he doesn't know what's going to happen. And he's a doctor that treated 80,000 plus women that were raped. And it's rape that is used as a tool of war by private militias like M23, and they're backed up by the Rwanda leader. And so the European community has decided just a couple of days ago to still give weapons to Rwanda. So even there, it's not just the film; it's the film alludes to something that is still as sort of a template still happening today, even if it's not exponentially worse. The numbers I heard is 47 women are raped per hour in the East Congo. This is staggering. Of course, it's similar to
Mm.
Gaza and Sudan and Yemen, you name it, right? But it's what dissected there, and I think rather than, I would say, it's also silent complicity. There's Mulai Yawengu, who's a Congolese filmmaker, who wrote for The Nation an article called "Soundtrack to a Complicit Silence." It's not just that people are reacting, but are actually not responding. And the film is out there, but then, you know, there's of course awareness is a big thing, but that I would say there is also that silent complicity with what's going on today, and the plays have not disappeared. Huh? Like Union Minière has changed their name because of all the backlash. They called it Umicore, and they're still responsible for the same situation.
So that that in some circles, including with some comrades of my own, there's some criticism of, as I'll phrase it, what you were just describing, the gap between what even some of us might feel like is a great piece of positive propaganda on your part, and then the follow up activity of the audience. So, in other words, said so. Uh, do you have any? So, like I is there a concern on your part of the sort of the liberal absorption of this kind of work? So when you're getting praised, from the Oscar community or Sundance, there is sometimes, well, there is a concern, I think, legitimately that that is the absorption by the liberal elite of what should be a condemnation of their whole society. So that would lead to someone writing in the Nation of all places, and there's a paradox even in that, around saying, where is the follow up? In
Right,
other
right.
words, did that make sense? Am I? Are
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah.
Okay? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I have to say, it doesn't make sense to preach to the choir, right? I
Mm,
think it's better to throw sort of something into the lion's den and then have some provocation there, and I would include the Oscars. But the Oscars, the dog branch is a stepchild of the Oscars. Like a couple of years ago, there were even discussions of like slashing the dog branch. And you have to know the dog branch is the election is actually happening by 700 documentary makers when it comes to the shortlist and then to the nominations, not to sort of who's the winner. That's another case. But it's persons and filmmakers like Laura Poitras who actually are part of that dog branch that actually have pushed, and I have to give it to them, they have pushed a very sort of cutting edge sort of inclusion. Not all, because you could have included other films as well, but you have Shiro Ito, who speaks up about, on the highest echelons of power within Japan, about rape. And before even the It's Me movement, she was speaking out as a woman, and the film is not even having a platform or being shown in Japan, but then is sort of nominated. That's admirable. We have the Palestinians, right? Khalil, sorry, I'm confusing with the Colombian Palestinian who's like sort of being in custody, which is bad. But Basil, the filmmaker, Palestinian filmmaker, with no other land, one, of course, which is admirable. He was able to open up and give a big statement at the Oscars. But they were sitting next to me. You have to imagine I'm sitting parterre at the Oscars. Next to me is the whole family of Basil with his mother, all in Palestinian flags. And behind me is First Nation from the film Sugarcane, all in First Nation regalia, also with the whole clan, with a part of the clan. That I think this is sort of a strange duck within the Oscars. And I think
so. Just to be clear, you're saying that there's within the process there's a more left wing involvement in determining which films and documentaries get selected for consideration.
Exactly.
That change. I see that. Okay.
Yeah, and you have to know, a lot of the Oscars is still sort of a remnant of the Hollywood industry, but the dog branch, they are trying to extend the voters where you have African voters on the African continent, Latin American voters, you have Asian voters, and a big part European voters. It's still, there's not that many, in the global South, but it's growing, and they're really pushing, to have sort of a larger representation. But you have to see that in the context. The dog branch is really like a stepchild of the Oscars. And still, I feel when Basil is making a statement there at the Oscars, I think, there's, of course, there's backlash in Israeli press and stuff. But I still think that it sort of has an echo. And I'm actually happy he won. But if we would have won, we would have made a statement. It was Zap Mama, Marie Dawn, who sort of reached the voice of André Blouin, right? André Blouin, who was the Pan-African rebel, very outspoken as a woman, and then was written out of history and labeled by the Belgian intelligence as the most dangerous woman in Africa. And hence she was put on the death list. I always thought murder is the prerogative of the CIA, but the Belgians had a death list as well, and André Blouin was on it. And I could hardly find any reference to her except for being called a bitch or a witch or a prostitute. And I thought, well, maybe that's interesting. He opened up, got in touch with Yves Blouin, the daughter, who, in a way, history has found a way to sort of seek redemption, where the memoirs are being republished. They were republished by in London a month and a half ago. Africa, My Country, the history of the Black Passionaria. But Marie Dawn, Zap Mama, who is a music icon in Belgium, and when she recorded the voice of André Blouin at our studio in Belgium, she just got back from the City of Joy. City of Joy is where the women that are banding together, that been raped, that transformed through music and theater their trauma into activism, which is very admirable. Still, I don't know what's going to happen there, because MT3 is also a part of that area now that has been claimed, even sort of being claimed as a different territory. But Zap Mama was in contact with Dennis Mukwege all the time when she came over also to Los Angeles, and she had made a statement about Free Congo and would read a statement about the extraction economy as well. We would have made a statement about what's going on in the East Congo. And so it's precisely there that I think, because you have a bigger megaphone with the Oscars, to get your message out there. So yeah, it's very schizophrenic. It's like as schizophrenic with the black jazz ambassadors that are sent out to defend democracy, but back home they're not even able to vote. They're second-rate citizens back home, but still they get a platform. When Louis Armstrong arrives 56 in Ghana, he's playing for an audience of 100,000. So it's not that.
And you've talked elsewhere about the differences in his performance based on when and where he was communicating. And I did want to ask you, because one of the things I walked away from watching your film, twice now, was I'm still not entirely clear what you are intending to say about the knowledge of those artists, about what they were being, somewhat forcibly involved, maybe not forcibly, but what they were being, um, the politics to which they were being put, uh, uh, or put in service of.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but
Well, you have to.
could say a little more about that if you would.
Yeah. Well, on the Africa tour, Louis Armstrong, it was a long year. It was a long year. He was there till like February 1961, and then he got home when actually Abbie Lincoln and Max Roach, together with the Women's Writer Coalition in Harlem, Maya Angelou, the writer, and playwright Rosa Guy, when they crashed the Security Council. That's when Louis Armstrong, for the first time, heard about the murder of Patrice Lumumba. But you have to know, he was sitting when he was, and he was the Belgian CEO of Union Minière, who actually argued with the Katanga lobby, which at the time was based in New York, pushing for Louis Armstrong to sing at Katanga. Uh, and Katanga was not even ratified by the United Nations. It was a secessionist government that was propped up by Union Minière. He was invited, but still he was grilling it, Trummy Trombone, which is an interview we found here. I'm actually here just at the Rutgers University. There's an interview by Trummy Trombone where he says, well, we were all siding with Lumumba, and Louis Armstrong was not shutting up. He was grilling Moshe Chombe. You have to know, it's a peculiar setup. He was lodged at the villa of Moshe Chombe, who was implicated in that murder of Patrice Lumumba. Mobutu is about to arrive to actually negotiate even payments for being involved in that murder. And you have Larry Devlin, the head of the CIA, and U.S. Ambassador Timberlake sitting around the table with Louis Armstrong and the Belgian advisors. And he is not aware, because Larry Devlin, his cover was agriculture advisor and a writer for the guide of Fodder Guides, which is a bit ludicrous. But Louis Armstrong was not in the know that he was the head of the CIA. But he still did grill Moshe Chombe, saying, you're in bed with big money. And these are the words by Trummy Trombone. And it's true. I would say, even if they're used as a propaganda tool, they're not passive agents. He refused to go play for a South African audience, apartheid's audience, or you might have heard he was changing the lyrics as well in the Black and Blue song. One sentence where, I'm white inside, he changed into I'm right inside. And he was very outspoken when it comes to Little Rock, where he burned his fingers. You have to know, in Knoxville, his concert was still being bombed by white supremacists because he had a mixed race team of musicians. And so with Little Rock, he literally said, I'm not going to go to Russia. First have to sort out the situation in the South. And so he even, there's the famous statement, the government can go to hell, which was published in the New York Times. And I think he thought maybe I might have burned my bridges. So he was a bit more cautious after that. But still, it's not that he was not sort of uncritical, even at the point where he would say, I'm going to renounce my U.S. citizenship and move back to Ghana, which he didn't. But he had a huge connection to Ghana when he was there. He was very much celebrated there.
Mm-hmm. You've also talked about, I did want to ask you, you've in a couple of interviews talked about the footnotes and the research that went into the film. Could you talk a little bit about some of the scholarship or the academics or resources that you leaned on in putting this film together?
But that's many-headed. So we did have quite a lot of advisors, like Ludo de Witte, who wrote the book Assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and then John Masombo, Lumumba scholar, there's some artists like Sami Balochi. There was a huge, also the Congolese community, the Afro-P community in Brussels was a big advisor. And of course, for me, it was, you know, of course, I'm Belgian, I'm white, and there's that danger of appropriation. And I wanted to open up as a dialogue. There's a difference between speaking with and speaking for. And it was so crucial to invite, for example, Jean Bovani, who's a Belgian-Congolese writer, invite Yves Blouin as part of the dialogue. Yves Blouin was very important for a lot of like how we would contextualize her mom. And she gave access to the memoirs, but was really heavily involved with constructing the narrative. And so I have to say, film is very much a collaborative effort. But there's crucially the advice of Ludo de Witte as a journalist who opened up all the access to the complicity of the United Nations. He found new cables, but also the complicity of the monarchy. And that subsequently made that there was a parliamentary commission in Belgium, which the conclusion was still wishy-washy, and Ludo de Witte had a lot of critique on that. The Belgian government said, yeah, we were in the know, but actually it was more than that. They were complicit. That's why the statement at the end of the film is really that Belgian government was complicit with that murder. You have to know that the gold teeth of Patrice Lumumba has been shipped back only, it was 2 years ago, a year and a half. And the monarchy, the royal couple is still debating, or are we going to say, I'm sorry, or are we going to say we have regret? And that's like a band-aid. It's a poor band-aid on a much larger situation that should be talked about. I have to give it to the royal couple that they visited the Panzi hospital where Dennis Mukwege is operating on all these raped women. But still, it's sort of a poor band-aid on something that is something much deeper that, is still wiped under the carpet for a big part.
And as you were saying, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say Patrice Lumumba is still labeled a communist in Belgium. It's still not sort of fully rectified, in a lot of academic situations. That was how he would label. And even the liberation of Stanleyville, Kisangani at the time, it's still celebrated by the paratroopers. It's still sort of like there is the younger generation. There's really something changing in Belgium, but you have the older Garde who I think there's still a disconnect, I feel. And that's maybe also because Congo was out there. It was l'Empire du Silence. It was the Empire of Silence. And we, like the Belgian population, was not in the know. They were kept stupid, and vice versa. A big failure of the Congo was also that, Congolese were not allowed to have a university degree. And there was a university, Louvanium in Kinshasa. They were not allowed to have sort of a university degree. They were kept stupid on both sides because it was threatening, right? It was threatening. If you call out for, Kwame Nkrumah joining Patrice Lumumba for the United States of Africa, it's threatening because if leaders decide for the destiny of their own country and that the riches would also benefit largely the population, it's threatening.
So I got it. So I know our time is a little bit short, but I got it. So I have to include a question about what you just referred to. In some of in the small spaces I'm in, there's been some criticism of your film for it being not sufficient in defending communism and not lampooning Khrushchev. But maybe I'm rushing, not being fair, but my thought was that your film was doing a great job of promoting African nationalism as a greater concern than the supposed communism or socialism of Lumumba and others involved. And I was wondering to what extent you were making a conscious choice or had thoughts about that or yeah. Can you work with that? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's a crucial question. But yeah, Malcolm X sums it up, right? He says it's not Africanism or Marxism or socialism that they're afraid of. It's Africanism. It's leaders deciding for their own destiny, as I said before. And then on the question of Nikita Khrushchev, I you know, as a as a journalistic approach, I have to sort of be accurate of what history was also, or uncovering history, because you have to dig deeper. To find André Blouin's and open up the story, including André Blouin, I had to dig, right? And it's the same
And
with
I did
Nikita.
love that part of the film, by the way. I got to say that I loved her inclusion in the
Oh,
film.
she's an
Yeah.
incredible, and I'm very happy that there's a lot of talk. There is the André Blouin house that is sort of. There's the André Blouin Award now that has been started by Vijay Prashad, the scholar
Oh
of the,
wow, yeah, I didn't know he did that. Okay.
yeah, the scholar of the global south.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to Nikita Khrushchev, I can only do my homework and open up. I think it's interesting also to tell the story of the silenced, and I think Nikita Khrushchev was sort of misrepresented. He was demonized in the United States, and his statement about we have to bury colonialism. That's what he literally said. He did say, he never said we have to bury United States with missiles. He never said that. But he did say, when he was denouncing Stalin in 1956, right? He did say, communism will bury capitalism. But still, that's not the same as saying we're going to invade the United States. And I have to give it to him because at one point, in 1959, he was the first Soviet leader to open up a détente, to sort of open up a dialogue about, the division in the world. And, subsequently, at one point, he sort of was opening up. He went to China 10 days later and refused Mao to have the bomb because he retracted all his nuclear scientists. And then the U2 debacle happened. And so, like 1 month before Congolese independence, we're talking May, the Paris stop backfired, and he asked President Eisenhower to apologize for the U2 spy plane. If a Russian spy plane would have flown over the United States, it would have it would have just been the complete opposite. They would have nuked Russia or something.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I was trying to be accurate to what history would give me, and I cannot but translate the. He gave 10 of the speeches. He addressed the United Nations 10 times in this 15th General Assembly top, and finding words like they're still lynching black people in the United States, and saying that in front of the General Assembly, it was, for me, I fell from my chair. So there's a lot of like how also Nikita Khrushchev has been rewritten into history, because there's a lot of stuff that sort of was sort of mistranslated, as Dizzy Gillespie literally says. He didn't say, we're going to bury you. He said, I love you. But of course, Dizzy uses his own words to sort of laugh with the situation. But, I've been critiqued on both sides, that I would sort of use Nikita Khrushchev as a way, as a propaganda tool, and on the other side as well. But I feel like I've tried to navigate to be true to history. And so, we give a portrait of Nikita Khrushchev first when he's about to take the plane in 1959 to head for the United States. And he's reminiscing, because these are the audio memoirs that were published in 1964. You have to know, in 1964, Nikita Khrushchev was overthrown by Brezhnev. He was renegated to his dacha and was written out of Soviet history. Not a lot of United States citizens know actually about that history. And in the audio memoirs, that's, it's 7 years. It's like Sergei Khrushchev, the late Sergei Khrushchev, because he died during the making of the film. The audio memoirs it's hours and hours and hours of material. So we had to sift with little sort of little programs to look for keywords. And one keyword was, for example, shoe. And of course, the slamming of the shoe, there was a lot of controversy. Did that really happen or not? Because there's no images. But apparently, what I try to, and also, again, not trying to falsify or trying to push a certain agenda, but literally have his words, and this has never been revealed before, that in his words, he literally said, yeah, I was so upset that I slammed my shoe. And so we use his words, but we leave it to that, because there's still like controversy about that. But there's some East Bloc delegates that really said, yeah, we saw him slamming his shoe. And then they asked subsequently, did he go barefoot to the rostrum or something? This is the Hungarians. But on the plane, when he's flying to the United States on the plane, he's reminiscing about Hungary. And, even if it's Nikita Khrushchev who initiates the decolonization resolution, also that story is sort of hardly been told in academic circles, that he was the one initiating resolution 1514, and that subsequently by the Global South, you have to sponsor it. It was an African country who sponsored the resolution, and then it was ratified 14th of December as resolution 1514 in I think 14 December 1960 it was ratified. But it's him who initiates that decolonization resolution. But you have to know, there's also an ambivalent relationship with the East Bloc, and some people have critiqued Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev for colonizing the East Bloc. And so, what happened in Budapest 1956, you cannot that's also a debacle. And then when he was on the plane to the United States in 1959, he's reminiscing about, if you make a faux pas, because I don't think he's a saint, he also made mistakes. And he's reminiscing about his mistake in Budapest and says, when you make a mistake in history, history will not forgive you. And the memory will haunt you forever. And you see images of the burning of Budapest. And so he's a
and it's always easier to be critical of someone else's colonization,
Exactly. But I have to give it to him. He was in a sense to try to rewrite, more in a way what was really going on with the speeches of Nikita Khrushchev, and that indeed he initiated the colonization resolution. Of course, he was playing on the Global South and trying to get the Global South in his camp. But it's different than proposing a decolonization resolution and siding with the Global South than actually sending arm twisters and black jazz ambassadors and exporting coup d'etats like Eisenhower did. But the world is so full of contradictions. And I think either way, I didn't defend the East nor the West. I think for me, indeed, I think it's that leaders, when they come up and try to sort of defend their own sovereignty, that's for me, that is crucial. And I would agree with Malcolm X, and it's not to I would be cautious about, I didn't want to sort of use this film as a tool as a tool of propaganda. It was trying to really open up, ask questions, make a kaleidoscopic approach where Nikita Khrushchev has a platform through, first-hand sources that he actually spoke into a cassette tape recorder, together with the home movies that Sergei Khrushchev sort of handed to us to be able to use, which was very generous. But open up a debate that actually is lagging, there's a lot of he was demonized in the West. He was demonized.
So just very quickly, because I again, I appreciate the time, but I did want to also ask about, do you have theories on Dag Hammarskjöld's death? Because I happened to watch your film sort of shortly after watching the Cold Case documentary of a couple years ago about Hammarskjöld, where the thesis there is that he's assassinated by a Belgian mercenary on his way because he's not being friendly enough to the efforts of the mining interests in Katanga, where as in your film, he is depicted as a defender of the colonial effort. So I just was wondering if you had, because I know it's not in your film, you don't discuss his death in your film, but I just was curious if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, he's also more of a complex character. I have to say that he, in 1955, against the advice of Foster Dulles, the then U.S. Secretary of State, he went to China to actually wanting to include Mao, China, into the United Nations, right? Taiwan at the time was on the Security Council, but Taiwan was representing China, which that's a population of nearly 1 billion that was not part of representation in. It's 1/5 of the world population that was not representing the United Nations. So he was able to free the prisoners, and in exchange opening up that dialogue, which was boycotted by the U.S. State Department. And then in 1956, he is installing the first UN blue helmets in the Suez Crisis against the colonial powers, because there was a veto by France and England saying, no, we're not going to get into that. And they were invading Egypt to reconquer the Suez Canal. And then I have to give it to Dag Hammarskjöld that he was able to organize, which was called silent diplomacy. He was talking to all the leaders in the Middle East, and he was able to sort of have the troops in on the terms of Abdel Nasser actually helping the Suez crisis. So, and he was very much in favor of decolonization, but at one point, you have to know his advisors were all American. It's only during the Congo crisis that, upon advice from Jawaharlal Nehru, that he included, for example, Rashasvar Dayal, who was upon advice of Jawaharlal Nehru, as the special representative in the UN Congo mission. There he changed some tactic, and Rashasvar Dayal was very much in favor against Larry Devlin for Kasavubu and Lumumba to get back into the government after Mobutu had sacked the parliament, right, with the aid of the Belgian intelligence and the CIA, which is 1 week before the 15th General Assembly. That's why the General Assembly is very much about the Congo crisis. The big absentee, of course, Patrice Lumumba. But Rashasvar Dayal was very much in favor of bringing back the government into place where Lumumba would still be part of the government. Dag Hammarskjöld, he had to navigate a lot of forces, and the UK and the United States actually refused or were about to actually withdraw their money as a threat. And if the UN Congo mission would fail, then it was the biggest mission ever, 20,000 troops, would fail, then also the United Nations would be in a big predicament. And it's Abdel Nasser and Kwame Nkrumah who said, we're going to withdraw our troops because I think Lumumba should still be back in government. And so he was navigating those two sort of elements, and he was with his back against the wall. And then he again, the silent diplomacy. He was talking to Abdel Nasser, talking to Kwame Nkrumah, Sékou Touré, Jawaharlal Nehru. He also called them into his office, the 38th floor, right, the famous Congo Club that actually was really sort of steering everything above the Security Council, what was going on in the Congo. But at one point, he did side with the West. And so he was, as Ludo de Wette was opening up in his book, there was a complicity on behalf of Dag Hammarskjöld. Mm-hmm. And well, then about the murder of Dag Hammarskjöld, I think he was murdered. There's the book by Susan Williams, The Murder of Dag Hammarskjöld. And there's chapter after chapter after chapter of evidence, which some of that, you know about the Samir papers. Desmond Tutu at the time opened up the papers of the murder of Dag Hammarskjöld, where South African mercenaries were apparently involved, which is in the cold case Hammarskjöld.
Yeah, it was. It's a very fascinating and spooky, pun intended, part of that film and history. Yeah,
but also, for example, there is the pictures that were photoshopped, the pictures of Dag Hammarskjöld with a bullet head in his forehead. If a plane crashes, you don't get a bullet head, and his body was found against a termite hill, sitting up, and then with a poker card, the ace of spades, which is typical mercenary sign. And there was also apparently, what I read in one chapter, Andola, which is now Zimbabwe, at the time Rhodesia, where he was supposed to land. There was a little plane. There were two mercenaries, South African mercenaries. One was Heuge. You can read it in the chapter of Susan Williams. There was one little plane, the Fuga plane, which is the Fuga plane that I mentioned in Soundtrack to Coup d'Etat, where they were dropping bombs, which are sponsored by the Union Minière, by the way, in North Katanga, as part of the genocide. And it's the same plane with a hole. And that plane was parked at Andola.
Wow.
And this Heuge mercenary character said, we have to go, we're going to call a short night, we have to go. While Dag Hammarskjöld was about to land. I'm not drawing any conclusion, I don't put this as evidence, but the same Heuge mercenary was present during the fusillade of Patrice Lumumba.
Wow.
And he got the Légion d'honneur at the Belgian embassy in South Africa. I'm talking much later in the 70s. So there's some things that if you read the book by Susan Williams, there's a lot of things that don't add up. Also that there was a plane station with CIA recordings and Andola. And so there was even, one of the pilots was actually indeed a Belgian mercenary. There's a conflation between South African mercenaries, which dates back to Project Gladio. This is maybe too much to dig into. But I do believe if you read the book I would say, I want to mention the sources. I can open up some sort of itineraries, but that's not evidence yet. The Sami papers are also in discussion. But if you add up all the chapters of that book, you cannot not but actually conclude, there was something else going on at the same time. Yeah. So, but I didn't mention, for me, it was a subplot in the film. There's an other film like called Dag Hammarskjöld. There is a whole expansion on the story of Dag Hammarskjöld. But we did have a statement at the time in the film, which was Kwame Nkrumah overthrown in 1966, Malcolm X shot in 1965 in Harlem, André Blouin expelled from the Congo, makes it to Paris, becomes a safe haven for African rebels, and then Nikita Khrushchev overthrown by Brezhnev in 1964, renegated to his dacha, written out of Soviet history, and then Dag Hammarskjöld murdered in 1961, September 1961. But I kept it to the only one quote, and with respect, sometimes, I would still change some things in the film as well. But we had that statement there.
Congolese have been massacred by white people in the Congo for years and years and years. And if the shoe is now on the other foot, only thing I can say is it's like chickens that always come back home to roost.
Do you personally feel, though, that there's some shame or involvement here or some guilt associated with the killing of other human beings?
I think that the white people should be ashamed of the deplorable situation that has been existing in the Congo, which is not the fault of the Congolese, but which is the result of instigation by European powers who are fighting each other over the mineral wealth of the Congo. And now to make it appear that the Congolese themselves are criminals or brutes because they're reacting to these injustices that they've been victimized by is again ducking the question.
Shambi is the murderer of Lumumba, who was the rightful prime minister of the Congo. Shambi is the man whose forces fought against the United Nations forces and against the United States, and despite this criminal past of Shambi, now the United States is backing Shambi, who has hired South African mercenaries who are hired killers to disrupt the peaceful efforts of the freedom fighters from Stanleyville to make the type of country there that they want. And it is this American support of Shambi, actually, that's at the root of the whole problem.